The amber lights cast long shadows across the worn floorboards as Maya Torres moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency. Her hands worked automatically, polishing glassware that already gleamed, but the repetitive motion helped keep her mind focused on the present rather than drifting toward memories she'd rather forget. The bar had been quiet all evening, just a handful of regulars nursing their beers and keeping to themselves. Exactly the kind of peaceful Friday night she'd grown to appreciate in the 3 months since arriving in Pinewood. Then came the sound that changed everything. 5 engines roaring in perfect synchronization, growing louder as they approached down the main street. The customers exchanged nervous glances, and one of them immediately dropped cash on the counter before heading toward the exit without a word. Maya didn't need an explanation. She'd heard enough whispered conversations between locals to know what those particular motorcycles meant. The door crashed open with unnecessary force, and Cole Brennan filled the entrance like he owned the place. Tattoos covered every visible inch of his arms, and his presence commanded attention in a way that made Maya's training kick in automatically. Behind him, 4 more men filed inside, spreading out with the kind of coordination that suggested they'd done this many times before. Each one carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Maya kept her expression neutral, the same professional mask she'd worn through countless difficult situations. Her steel blue eyes took in every detail, while her hands continued their work, never betraying the rapid calculations running through her mind. Exit routes, potential weapons, distances between threats. The mental checklist happened so automatically she barely registered it anymore, just muscle memory from a life she'd tried to leave behind. Cole approached the bar with deliberate slowness, each heavy footfall announcing his intention to dominate the space. When he settled onto a stool, the wood creaked under his weight. 5 whiskeys, he said without preamble, and make them the expensive stuff, not whatever cheap garbage you usually pour. Maya reached for the top-shelf bourbon without hesitation, her movements efficient and controlled. As she poured the first glass, she felt Cole's eyes studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "You're new around here," he observed, though it sounded more like an accusation. The previous owner never hired pretty faces, said they caused too much trouble. She slid the first glass across the polished wood, maintaining just enough eye contact to show she wasn't intimidated without appearing challenging. "Rosie was good to me," Maya replied evenly. "I appreciate the opportunity." The other 4 men had spread throughout the small space, not quite surrounding her, but creating an unmistakable sense of enclosure. Their leather jackets displayed the Iron Skull's insignia, and their reputation preceded them throughout the county. Protection rackets, intimidation, the usual small-town tyranny that thrived in places where law enforcement remained conveniently distant or deliberately blind. Cole accepted his whiskey but didn't drink, instead rotating the glass slowly as if reading fortunes in the amber liquid. "Rosie understood how business works in this town," he continued, his conversational tone laden with implication. "Smart woman knew when to show proper respect to the people who keep establishments like this running smoothly." Maya poured the remaining drinks, hyper-aware of every movement around her. The mental discipline that had kept her alive in far more dangerous situations now focused on this small-town bar confrontation. Her fingers unconsciously moved toward her collarbone, touching the dog tags that rested beneath her shirt. The metal was warm from her body heat, worn smooth from years of unconscious contact. The engravings told a story she spent every day trying not to remember. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres, combat medic, 23 months deployed, 3 Purple Hearts she'd never wanted to earn. "I'm sure Rosie was an excellent businesswoman," Maya said carefully, setting down the last glass. "What else can I get for you, gentlemen?" Cole's smile revealed teeth that had seen their share of violence. "Oh, I think there's plenty you can do for us," He gestured around the nearly empty bar with proprietary confidence. See, Rosie's bar operates under certain arrangements, protection agreements that ensure everyone stays safe and prosperous. The word protection hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Maya's training whispered warnings she'd hoped never to heed again in civilian life. Her hand moved toward her necklace again, fingers finding the familiar shape of military identification through the fabric of her shirt. The tags connected her to people who died in the sand, people she couldn't save despite her training and desperate efforts. Protection from what, exactly? Maya asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear him say it explicitly. Cole seemed amused by the question. He took his first sip of whiskey, savoring both the alcohol and the moment. Well now, that depends entirely on how cooperative people choose to be. Rosie paid us $300 monthly, and in return, nobody bothered this establishment. No broken windows, no fights that escalated beyond control, no unfortunate accidents that might damage business. His crew nodded in practiced agreement, their body language radiating carefully calibrated menace. They'd performed this routine countless times, refining their approach until it achieved maximum psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability. Technically, they weren't making threats. They were simply offering services. Maya processed the situation with the analytical mind, developed through years of high-stakes decision-making. 5 armed men, familiar with local territory, apparently operating with impunity. The intelligent response would be temporary compliance while she figured out an exit strategy. But something in Cole's casual assumption of control over her choices triggered a different reaction entirely, something that connected to memories of taking orders in situations where lives hung in the balance. "That's an interesting business model," she said, her voice remaining level despite tension coiling in her chest. "What exactly do these protection services include?" Cole's expression shifted slightly, recognizing something in her tone that didn't match his expected script. Most people responded with fear or anger when confronted with extortion. Maya's clinical curiosity represented something outside his normal experience, and uncertainty made predators more dangerous rather than less. "Whatever needs protecting," he answered, his voice dropping to a more ominous register. "Property, inventory, personal safety. Amazing how many unfortunate things happen to people who don't understand local customs." The 2 remaining customers suddenly developed urgent business elsewhere, abandoning their drinks and heading for the exit with barely concealed haste. Their departure left Maya alone with 5 men who'd made their intentions crystal clear. The isolation amplified every sound, the refrigerator's hum, the wall clock's distant tick, leather scraping against wood as the bikers shifted position. Maya glanced toward the phone mounted behind the bar, calculating response times. Even if she called for help, how long before anyone arrived? And what would these men do while they waited? Her military training suggested that controlling the engagement's pace offered the best defensive option, but civilian life complicated those instincts with legal and social constraints that hadn't existed in combat zones. "I appreciate the information," she said, buying time while her mind worked through available options. "Let me discuss these arrangements with the owner." Cole's laugh carried genuine amusement now, harsh and grating in the intimate space. "Sweetheart, you're looking at the new management. Rosie sold this place last week to a holding company that contracts all security through us. That makes you our employee now, whether you realize it or not." The revelation hit like cold water. This wasn't random harassment. It was calculated takeover, probably planned for months while they waited for opportunity. Rosie's retirement hadn't been coincidental. It was orchestrated by people who understood exactly how to eliminate obstacles. Maya's hand moved unconsciously toward her necklace again, fingers finding the familiar metal shape through thin fabric. The tags connected her to a version of herself that knew how to handle predators. But that version existed in a world with different rules, where violence was an accepted problem-solving tool rather than a last resort with devastating legal consequences. A photograph slipped from her pocket as she reached for a towel, fluttering to the floor behind the bar where only she could see it. The image showed 5 people in desert camouflage, their faces young and confident, arms linked against a backdrop of military vehicles. 3 of those faces belonged to people who never made it home, their stories ending in explosions and screaming that still echoed in her nightmares. Cole noticed the photograph and leaned forward, trying to get a better look. "What's that you've got there, soldier girl?" His tone carried new mockery, as if he'd discovered a weakness to exploit. "Playing dress-up, or is that some kind of Halloween costume?" The casual dismissal of her service triggered something deeper than anger, something that predated her careful civilian persona and reached back to desert nights when staying alert meant staying alive. Maya retrieved the photograph with movements that appeared casual but carried the precise economy that comes from military conditioning. "Just old friends," she said, though her voice had developed an edge that wasn't there before. "Military friends," Cole observed, with predatory satisfaction. "That explains the way you stand, how you watch the room. But here's the thing about soldiers, especially female soldiers." He paused for effect. "They're trained to follow orders, and right now, your orders come from me." Around the bar, his crew shifted positions subtly, creating a more obvious pattern of enclosure. What began as casual intimidation was evolving into something more direct. Maya felt the familiar weight of decision pressing against her consciousness. The woman she'd tried to become over 2 years, the quiet civilian seeking peace and anonymity, warred against the soldier who never really left active duty. Cole drained his whiskey and set the empty glass down with deliberate force. "Here's how this works. You pay us $500 monthly, increased from what Rosie contributed since we're taking on additional responsibilities. Consider it management transition fees." The escalation wasn't surprising, but the personal targeting felt deliberate. Maya recognized the pattern from situations where her military background became liability rather than asset. Some people viewed veterans, especially female veterans, as either broken or potentially threatening, requiring control. 500 seems steep for a place this size, Maya observed, her training demanding intelligence gathering even under pressure. "What are these additional responsibilities?" Cole gestured around with proprietary confidence. "For starters, we'll be keeping much closer oversight of operations here, making sure new management understands local customs. Then there's inventory management, customer relations, personnel oversight. Each item represented another level of control, another way of inserting his organization into every business aspect. The methodology was sophisticated in its simplicity, incremental authority assumption until resistance became practically impossible. Personnel oversight, Maya repeated, focusing on the most immediately threatening item. "What does that involve?" Cole's expression shifted toward something darker. "Making sure staff members understand their positions in the hierarchy. Some people, especially newcomers, need extra guidance finding their proper place." One of the bikers, a lean man with prison tattoos covering his forearms, approached and leaned across the bar. His proximity deliberately violated her personal space, an invasion designed to trigger responses that would compromise her decision-making. "Boss is being patient with you," he observed. "Most people figure out the score faster than this." Maya maintained her position despite every instinct screaming to create distance. Military training emphasized controlling initial responses to provocation, maintaining tactical flexibility until the optimal moment presented itself. Cole rose from his stool with deliberate menace. His height and bulk cast shadows across the bar surface. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly. This isn't negotiation. This is me explaining how things work so you don't make unfortunate mistakes." The psychological pressure continued mounting. But Maya felt something unexpected stirring beneath her carefully maintained civilian composure. The polite bartender persona she'd cultivated for 2 years started developing cracks, revealing glimpses of the soldier who learned to function where hesitation meant death. Cole noticed her gesture toward the necklace and decided to exploit perceived weakness. Those your dead soldier friends under there must be tough, carrying reminders of everyone you couldn't save. The words hit with surgical precision, targeting exactly the psychological wounds Maya had spent 2 years trying to heal. Images flashed through her consciousness. Helicopter rotors spinning against desert sky, radio voices calling for medical assistance, her hands covered in blood belonging to people she'd trained with. "You don't know anything about them," Maya said, her voice dropping to a register that carried warning signals for anyone trained to recognize the difference between fear and focused intent. "I know they're dead and you're alive," Cole continued with calculated brutality. "I know you're standing here serving drinks instead of playing soldier." Maya's breathing became deeper, more controlled, as her body began accessing stress responses that served her well in combat zones. The hypervigilance that made her an effective medic under fire redirected toward the immediate tactical situation, cataloging weapons, distances, vulnerabilities with mechanical precision. Cole leaned across the bar, bringing his face close enough that she could smell whiskey mixed with tobacco. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept our terms, show proper gratitude, and learn to appreciate the stability we provide. Or you're going to discover just how unstable life becomes for people who don't understand local customs." Maya's fingers found her dog tags through fabric, tracing familiar engravings, connecting her to people who died believing in principles worth fighting for. In the growing silence, she made her choice. "I understand your business model," she said, her posture shifting from defensive to something more defined, "but I'm not interested in your protection services." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around the bar, the 5 bikers exchanged glances, communicating volumes without speech. Cole's expression hardened, predatory amusement draining from his features. "You might want to reconsider," he said, signaling his crew with a subtle gesture. They began moving with practiced coordination. The lean man slid around the bar's end, positioning to cut off her retreat. Another approached from the opposite side, while the remaining 2 maintained positions near the entrance. The movement was unmistakable, designed to create psychological pressure through spatial control. "I think there's been misunderstanding," Maya continued, keeping her voice level. "This is a legitimate business serving a peaceful community. I'm sure we can find a solution without threats." Cole laughed without humor. "Peaceful community. That's rich. You know what keeps communities peaceful? People who understand their place." The biker behind the bar reached for her shoulder. "Boss is being reasonable," he said. "Maybe you need help understanding." The physical contact triggered immediate response Maya barely contained. "Please don't touch me," she said firmly without aggression. Self-defense laws required clear documentation of unwanted contact before physical response became legally justified. Dakota moved around the bar himself, abandoning pretense of business negotiation. "Big mistake," he said, pulling something from his jacket that glinted in ambient light. The weapon's appearance fundamentally altered calculations. When the lean man lunged forward, attempting to grab her arms, muscle memory guided her response. Step left, avoiding reaching hands, redirect momentum with minimal force, create distance while maintaining defensive positioning. But there were too many. As she evaded one attacker, another moved to flank her. The third grabbed her left arm with bruising force. Maya responded with textbook defensive technique, using his leverage against him to break the hold. Cole approached with deliberate menace, recovered balance, and open aggression. Maya moved with purpose rather than panic, applying defensive techniques with precision, calibrated to stop attacks without unnecessary injury. Her responses targeted specific pressure points and leverage opportunities. The first attacker found himself on the floor with dislocated shoulder. The second experienced temporary paralysis as nerve compression interrupted voluntary muscle control. The third staggered backward, with tears streaming, result of precise contact with sensitive facial nerves. Cole received special attention, his weapon-wielding hand immobilized through pressure application, forcing him to drop whatever he'd intended. A follow-up technique left him gasping as his diaphragm struggled to resume normal function. The entire sequence lasted less than 90 seconds. Maya stood surrounded by incapacitated men, her breathing controlled despite adrenaline coursing through her system. Sirens grew audible, mechanical wailing announcing law enforcement arrival. Deputy Martinez burst through the door with weapon drawn, taking in the scene with trained assessment. "Everyone on the ground, hands visible," he commanded, though his attention focused primarily on the bikers. "Sergeant Torres," he said, addressing Maya with formality that surprised everyone. "Are you injured?" The use of her military rank revealed connection, explaining his rapid response. "No injuries, sir," she responded automatically. "Multiple attackers, defensive response only, minimal force applied." Martinez nodded, holstering his weapon as backup arrived. "Video surveillance confirms self-defense," he announced, gesturing toward security cameras. "Clear case of assault on the suspect's part." The revelation transformed legal dynamics completely. Cole's crew faced charges for assault, trespassing, attempted extortion, while Maya's defensive response received protection under state self-defense statutes. But victory came with costs extending beyond immediate safety. The encounter shattered peaceful anonymity Maya spent 2 years building, exposing her military background and combat capabilities to a community that might not understand the difference between defensive necessity and aggressive violence. Martinez approached with careful movements of someone understanding trauma responses. "Maya," he said gently, "you did everything right. Clean defensive action, proportional response, clear legal justification." As paramedics arrived treating injured bikers, Martinez guided Maya toward his patrol car for private conversation. "I know this isn't what you wanted. The quiet life, fresh start. But sometimes the world doesn't let us escape who we were." Maya nodded, understanding her time as anonymous bartender had ended permanently. "What happens now?" she asked. Martinez pulled a business card bearing federal agency logos. "There's a position available, Veteran Advocacy Program, helping design safe spaces for trauma survivors. The work might give you purpose beyond hiding from the past." Around them, Cole and his crew faced transportation to county lockup, their protection racket exposed. Rosie's bar would operate free from extortion for the first time in years, yet Maya felt no satisfaction in victory. Standing beneath flickering streetlights where her anonymity died, but her purpose might be reborn, Maya finally understood that healing wasn't about escaping the past, but choosing how to carry it forward into something meaningful.